Welcome back to the Solid Verbal boys and girls. My name's Ty Hildenbrandt, that guy over there. Dan Rubenstein, welcome back to the show, good sir. What is new?
Good sir, like I've returned to your estate in 1908 England. I'm good. I'm great, Ty. The sun is out. We get to talk another team today. I'm about to get my teeth cleaned. So what's better than that, Ty? Tennessee and a dentist.
Beautiful.
I'm just trying to throw you a little bit every episode.
A little bit of a curveball, but I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. We're going to have Austin Price on from VolQuest.com momentarily to talk through all things Tennessee. We put out a call last week on social media asking folks, who should we bring on to talk Tennessee? We got a lot of great folks. Decided to reach out to Austin from VolQuest and bring him on. So we're excited about that. I have a lot of questions about Tennessee. I know you do as well. Tennessee's in a really interesting spot. We talked about Penn State on the last episode. I think Tennessee's got a little bit in common with Penn State in that they're always good enough to get some of that preseason hype. But as we've seen the last couple seasons, not necessarily good enough to get over that hump of Georgia and Alabama. I mean, 2 years ago, yes, they beat Alabama, but it's been this ongoing struggle to try and assert themselves above some of the best in the SEC. And I'm curious to get Austin's take on where Tennessee stands now, what Heupels' philosophy is to try and differentiate from some of those schools in the SEC. How do you narrow the gap between them and, I guess, Georgia at this point? There's just so much fascination. Nico is the new quarterback. Just so much that we could talk about with this team.
Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below. I really appreciate, and I think you're right, I really appreciate, and I'll mention this to Austin, how much of a great TV show Tennessee is. And even for that matter, like Tennessee is another one of those, like the most college football program, just in terms of like the weird coaches that have come through, the weird stories, the beautiful traditions. Like what is Tennessee's end zone like? It says Tennessee. No, it's a checkerboard. Like, and so they just try to run out of the tunnel. Yes, but through a giant power tee. They've got
led by a dog. Led by a
coonhound.
That's
yes,
right.
Smokey. It's just, and so they fight song, like, well, it's a bluegrass song from the late 60s that they've co-opted as their fight song. So like, it's just the best. It's the absolute best. And like, you pair that with like the weird Penn State traditions. And as I was actually like building the thumbnail for the Penn State episode, I'm reminded that Penn State has like the lowest rent East Bay ass mascot, right? It's just like all these schools spend so much money designing and perfecting a mascot, and Penn State's like, we got it from a rental house in 1981, and we're just, I don't know, we got a good deal, we're sticking with it. I just love all of it, and Tennessee's a great example of that too, and it's great. I love it.
I've told you my story about going to a Notre Dame game. I don't know the year.
Okay.
But it was at Notre Dame Stadium, and our tickets were right next to the Tennessee band.
Yeah.
Tennessee came to South Bend. And that song was etched into my brain for an eternity. And to some degree, Mama H and I still talk about that.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't get over it. It was just constant and in your face. And for as much as we hated it in the moment, it's pretty fun to talk about. It's pretty fun to talk about, especially with college football being so rich with all these traditions. Tennessee has so many of them, and that's only part of what makes them so damn cool.
Accusations over cash in a McDonald's bag recently? Like, we're not talking about like a 1989. We're talking about very recent accusations of cash in a McDonald's bag. I unironically, I genuinely love the Tennessee football experience, and I hope for Tennessee fans that they're able to enjoy the actual Tennessee football experience this year and in years to come. But it's just like, oh, they tailgate in a parking lot? Well, like some people do. The rest of them are on boats. There's an official name for it. They give away koozies. It's great. It's all great to me. And so, yeah, the TV show has been up and down. You know, season 1 a couple of years ago was good. Season 2 took a turn last year. But no, I'm very excited to get into the sort of looking big picture, either this season and beyond, you know, how it looks for Josh Heupel and the Vols.
Well, let's do that. Let's bring Austin Price in. Again, if you are new to the show, hit follow wherever it is you are listening to us, watching us, hit subscribe, whatever the button is on your app, click it. That's one way you can support what Dan and I do and get all of our episodes. We also put all of these episodes out on our Patreon at verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. We put them out a little bit early without the ads. While you're there, you also get access to all sorts of bonus features like our Discord server, some of the games we play, et cetera, et cetera. So go and check that out, verballers.com. Without further ado, though, let's welcome in the man of the hour. His name is Austin Price from volquest.com. Austin, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. You?
Fantastic.
We're doing well. Yeah, thanks for taking time. Tennessee's one of those programs that we've talked a lot about here in the offseason. And as we started planning out this Will It Ever Happen For series that we jump-started last week, Tennessee was one that came to mind. We've been trying to ask what is holding some specific teams back from achieving more. Beyond the schedule for Tennessee, which has had Bama and Georgia on it, obviously that presents a challenge. Is there anything with this program that you point at and you say, aha, that's something I think is holding them back that they need to fix?
Well, for several years, it was bad coaching hires, bad personnel decisions on, kids that were, ended up elsewhere that grew up Tennessee fans like Trevor Lawrence or T. Higgins and that type of thing. With this current roster, I think that they're just kind of pulling themselves back up from, the previous investigation of the previous staff. I think, being able to get to 11 wins in year 2 was such a real surprise. It probably set some unrealistic expectations even last year with a group that wasn't as talented as the group in year 2 for Coach Heupel. But I think they're back closer to where they were in 2022 than they were a year ago. Nico Iamaleava has a ton of hype around him, and rightfully so. And I think they're really good at at the point of attack on both lines of scrimmage. Defensive line is really deep. Offensive line not as deep, but still talented in who they have starting for them. Probably the biggest question is running back, and just kind of can Dylan Sampson carry the load? How much depth do they have there? They don't have a lot of experience, but love their skill and just love the overall team with a schedule that's kind of awkward.
Yeah.
2024.
You mentioned Nico, obviously a ton of hype around this kid going back to his days in high school. The little we saw of him in the spring game was obviously very encouraging. As somebody who follows the team as closely as you do, what is perception versus reality with him? Is he as good as advertised in your opinion?
Yeah. If you talk to anybody over there, the ability to process and see things and get the ball out of his hands is really, really good for a kid that doesn't have a ton of college experience to this point. He's got the one start against Iowa in the Citrus Bowl, performed well, could perform a lot better. He did not have near the amount of weapons to throw to in that game as he has right now. I think Tennessee's much more athletic at the skill spots heading into this year. With the addition of Chris Brazzell, Brew McCoy coming back, Dante Thornton getting healthy, the additions of Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley out of high school. So I think that all those things play into his favor. It just comes down to experience. I think what you see with Nico is he never gets too high, never gets too low. He is such a cool customer, and he does not get rattled. He's not reading the press clippings going, ooh, like I'm getting all this praise. He doesn't think in those terms. The kid's one of eight children, and he just kind of rolls with it. His mom, has battled cancer, and she's, doing well right now. But I mean, he's seen a lot in his 18, 19 years of life. And, I think just kind of handles himself like a 23, 24-year-old from a maturity standpoint.
One of the really fun things about Tennessee 2 years ago is the Vols were a great TV show, right? Bombing it deep, the shootouts, the speed out wide, the emergence of Hendon Hooker. Last year, they were also a great TV show, only if you weren't a Tennessee fan, right? That there was chaos, there was up and downs, there was, a big lead at halftime against Alabama and then sort of disappearing in the second half. How does Tennessee this year, whether it's coaching decisions, whether it's, figuring out what the vision for the program is, how does Tennessee become boring this year in a very good way? Because I think that's what they need, right? They need less red zone chaos. They need fewer penalties. Like, is that like the sort of understated goal for Tennessee? Just be like boring this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the penalties are always going to kind of be there because of the pace of play that Heupel likes to play with. You inevitably end up with a false start here or there. You just have to avoid the 10-yard holding penalty when you gain 20 on first down, or the 15-yard penalty when you did something good. I think that you can be more exciting this year with the vertical passing game, I think, returning. I mean, everybody remembers Joe's arm, but so much of what they did last year was kind of side to side and let the athlete go do that. I think they'll work the middle of the field a lot more this year. And I don't know if they'll ever be boring, but at the same time, I think they'll be more efficient or have the chance to be more efficient this fall.
What are the now that we're 3+ years in, what are the perceived among the fan base, among people you talk to, strengths and weaknesses right now of Josh Heupel as an in-game coach, as a recruiter, as a program head? How is he looked at from like a 10,000 foot view?
Yeah, I think that he's looked at as a real guy. Just like he's super relatable. Coach Heupel is one that the players really gravitate towards. Parents really like him. He is very much a player's coach. He's been in that spot. You hear that, from a lot of recruits. You hear that from his current players. I mean, he's been there. He finished runner-up for the Heisman Trophy. He understands what it's like in the locker room. He understands all the dynamics of the locker room, and he's able to kind of navigate some of that stuff. The one hiccup they've had has been the ability to handle loud environments. And you go there for spring practice, and there they are in the indoor, and they've got the crowd noise jacked up, loud, working on that, right? They know where they've got to get better, so they're working on getting better in those realms. But from an X's and O's standpoint, outside of Georgia, and most teams struggle against them, they've been really good about near anybody they played. And, I think the defense under Tim Banks has been really steady Eddie and has gotten better every year. I thought last year, honestly, I thought they were a better unit than the offense was. And so I think they can be just as good, if not better, this year. I think their pass rushers are more dynamic. Roman Harrison out. James Pierce gets more playing time. Josh Josephs, Caleb Herring. I think Keenan Peely's the key. If they can keep him healthy, the linebacker from BYU that got hurt at the first of last year. Now, again, he's 26 years old. But if they can keep him healthy, I think he's the key to kind of can unlock a lot of the stuff defensively for this group.
What's interesting now, obviously, and what everybody's sort of thinking about summer heading into the season is we've got new look SEC, we've got new look Big Ten, a new look ACC, and Tennessee is sort of on the forefront of that because their SEC opener is at Oklahoma, if memory serves this year.
All right.
How do you feel Tennessee fits in to an expanded SEC in this moment? Obviously, adding teams in that upper tier with Tennessee. Do you think it dilutes things? Do you think it's a fun new challenge? These are two schools Tennessee does recruit against. Where does Tennessee fit in? Do you see it as a good situation with an expansion to 12 teams as well in the playoff?
Yeah, I think the fact that you're in a 12-team playoff now and you're looking at 3 minimum and to me as many as 5 SEC teams getting in the playoff, depending on what happens in other conferences. I think 4 is probably the steady number of teams you'll see from the SEC. I think you feel good about it. Depending on how they work the schedule long term, once they kind of get a real rotation in, once they figure out if they're going to a 9-game schedule or an 8-game schedule or whatever, I think Tennessee's ability to not have Georgia and Alabama every year like they've had. Auburn and Tennessee have played the top 2 teams, arguably, in the country every year. And so when you're trying to dig yourself out and hey, I'm pretty good. Now I get to play Alabama. And then I get to play Georgia. And I don't even count teams like LSU, Auburn, those teams. And in Florida. Florida's been Tennessee's nightmare. It doesn't mean they were terrible last year. And yet they somehow look like world beaters against Tennessee in Gainesville. It's a house of horrors down there at the Swamp for the ball. So, I think overall it's good, though, because I think it levels things out. I think especially once you get to that scheduling component, would you rather play Georgia and Alabama every year, or would you rather say, okay, Alabama's my permanent, I'll play Georgia every now and again, and now I'm playing Texas and Alabama. I get Texas is good. Texas has been down, though, also. So, to me, Georgia is just, they're in a different level than everybody else right now. They are the, quote, new Alabama, so to speak, and Kirby Smart has got them going as well as anybody.
I wanted to ask about that because, as we've alluded here a couple times now, Tennessee's in like this infinite game against Georgia, Alabama, other programs in the SEC, many of which are willing to write a blank check to invest in football and get it to where they think it needs to be. To be clear, Tennessee has also invested very handsomely in the football program. I'm not implying otherwise, but I'm wondering What is Josh Heupel doing to sell his program to try and differentiate it from some of the competition that he's up against in the SEC, especially now as this whole thing has expanded?
Yeah, I think he's looking for kids that fit kind of his, his program, kind of his core values. He wants the best players he can get, but he wants them to fit within the framework of what, he and Coach Banks want to do offensively and defensively. And, they love to talk about, fast, fun, and real. And that's a slogan, like no different than a lot of slogans out there, Clemson's all in or whatever else. But I think that a lot of it is true. Like Tennessee wants to play fast, and if you're playing fast, you're scoring points, you're having a little bit of fun. And again, Coach Heupel is about as real as it gets. He's comfortable in his own skin. He doesn't care if he doesn't shave for his coach's show. He doesn't care if anybody goes, man, that guy needs a shave. He's got the 5 o'clock shadow going. He doesn't bother him. I watched him interact with my kids. When we were out there, covering Nico's game 2 years ago when he was a senior in high school, and Coach Heupel was there to evaluate Nico, and just how he didn't have to interact with my children. And I watch him interact with them, and it's like he's just a regular guy. He has 2 kids of his own. One's in high school, the other one's in middle school, and he's super relatable and just a genuinely nice guy. And that's not to say the guys that weren't here before weren't nice guys, because they were in their own respect. But Coach Heupel he doesn't think about like being the head coach at Tennessee versus not. He's just Josh Heupel, the same guy that grew up in South Dakota, the same guy that played JUCO ball in Utah and played his college ball at Oklahoma.
From your vantage point, how big is that gap between Tennessee and a school like a Georgia? Has Heupel done anything to chip away at that gap? Every time we see a news story about Georgia, it feels like they're getting better. They're adding more talent. Kirby Smart is just winding this thing up year in and year out. But is Tennessee making a dent in that at all?
I think they're gaining on them. Now, as far as when they played, there's not been any gain. Like Georgia has pounded Tennessee the last couple of years. And, Tennessee, again, I think has gained on the rest of the league. They've gained on the Alabamas. To me, they've gained on Georgia, but on the field, the results haven't necessarily showed up. But when you look at Tennessee's roster, where it's at the line of scrimmage, where it's at the skill players, I think that there's, I think 2 years from now, you're going to look back and go, man, Tennessee's had this amount of guys drafted pretty high over the last couple of years, with James Pierce being, I think, a top 10 pick next year. And depending on who's drafting where, could go as high as number 1 in their needs. You look at a guy like Lance Hurd, Nico Iamaleava, Mike Matthews. I mean, there's a lot of players that I think that can get Tennessee to where they want to go. But, again, getting to where Georgia's at is kind of like playing in 2012 and going, I got to get to where Alabama's at.
Right. Because
Georgia is at a different level. And I know they didn't play for it last year. They lost at the most inopportune time. But had they gotten into the tournament, do they win it? That's my question, because I think there's a good shot that Michigan's not got the championship and Georgia does, had Georgia not lost when they lost.
Sure. And speaking of last year, and I went back and rewatched a couple of the games, Joe Milton was a 6th-year college student last year. And so I think there was a lot of hype coming into the year based on his arm strength, based on the bowl game against Clemson, that, we were going to see a lot of the same things on offense, even with the new offensive coordinator. And we didn't. Tennessee, at their most successful, was successful on the ground. They weren't popping big plays down the field like I think we had come to expect. Is there anything you think the coaching staff will take from a positivity standpoint from last year, something that they were able to adapt into, something they were able to learn from as they move forward with the new quarterback this year?
Yeah, I mean, their ability to run the ball when everybody knew they wanted to run the ball. I mean, Jalen Wright was fantastic. And, the question is can Dylan Sampson, Cam Seldon, Peyton Lewis, and that group of backs be close to what they were a year ago in that running back room? Because if they are, I do think that the passing game is going to be better. And how much do they run Nico? Here's the real crux of Tennessee's, offensive kind of like what they want to do. Like they were really good when, Hendon wasn't necessarily the running quarterback, but he was a quarterback that could run, right? He made plays with his legs when he needed to. Nico the same way, but Tennessee has a former walk-on in Gaston Moore as the backup quarterback and Jake Merklinger, who is a true freshman. Like there's not a lot of depth there. So you've got kind of inexperienced, redshirt freshman Nico Iamaleava, and then a former walk-on turned fifth-year guy who came with Heupel from Central Florida and Gaston Moore, and then a true freshman, Jake Merkley. So, how much can they afford to run Nico? I think this is the real question. Did they run him against NC State week 2 on a neutral site game? Or do they save that more for okay, we got to beat Alabama. We'll run him then. I think there's a lot of questions to be answered just about kind of where they can get to from a running standpoint. Because, again, the misnomer is that Hype throws it around every play. This isn't the fun and gun. This isn't Steve Spurrier. They do throw it a ton, but, man, they're pretty balanced when you look at the numbers. And that's not just a last year thing. That's an every year thing. They just happen to lead with the running game last year instead of it being kind of the nice. It became Batman last year. Other years, the running game is Robin.
Am I crazy, or is this year's schedule pretty great, all things considered? I mean,
they don't play
no Texas, no Ole Miss, no LSU, no Mizzou. It's a pretty great slate, especially home road splits. Yes.
Yeah, and they don't. It's weird. Okay, they start with Chattanooga, whatever. Then neutral site game for NC State. Then another lesser game. Then on the road at Oklahoma, bye week. On the road at Arkansas. So your first meaningful home game isn't until Florida coming to town in mid-October.
Yeah,
but you don't really have this murderer's row, right? You kind of have little breaks. You might have back-to-back, they'll play Florida and Alabama back-to-back. But both those games are here, So, I mean, it is positioned well. Whereas if Tennessee can beat NC State and beat Oklahoma, at that point, they're going into the bye week 4-0 before they play Arkansas. You feel probably pretty good against an Arkansas team that Sam Pittman's on the hot seat. Let's say you win that one. Then it's the old arch nemesis Florida, but you get them at home. If they were to somehow be undefeated playing Alabama, this place will be, again, a powder keg, much like it was when Tennessee was undefeated playing Alabama 2 years ago. Yeah. But again, got to get through NC State. That's a sneaky game, a game Tennessee could lose with NC State bringing in a bunch of transfers. What are they, right? Are they going to mesh and be great, or are they not? And, that's a sneaky game for Tennessee early in the year. And then, again, Oklahoma, offensive line not very good, but their quarterback, Jackson Arnold's a pretty good talent, much like Nico. So, what do those games look like in September?
To you, when you look at the various position groups on this Tennessee team, and this isn't intended to be like a season preview episode, but the difference against this schedule between, say, 8 and 9 wins and 10 and 11 wins, is there a position group that okay, if these guys click, that's the difference, that's a 2-win difference potentially?
I think it's running back on offense.
Okay.
And defense, I would just go the secondary. You have a lot of new faces back there, both at corner and at safety. And so what does that group look like, right? I mean, you lost, to graduation, you lost Jalen McCullough, who had started a record number of games for you. I mean, just played a gross amount of snaps. At corner, you lose a bunch of guys that have played some football for you, but I think they're more athletic at corner. Jermod McCoy, Ricky Gibson, I think are two fantastic guys out on the edge. Jordan Thomas has got a lot of hope at nickel, but I'm gonna tell you right now, he better stay healthy. He's been injury, nicked up a lot. If he's been injury prone, if he gets nicked up, Boo Carter, a true freshman from East Tennessee, is a guy. And and if he gets in there, Jordan Thomas can get Wally pipped in a hurry. And then at safety, what does Tennessee look like back there? Be interested to kind of see where Tim Banks wants to take that safety position. So I would go running back on offense and the secondary on defense.
And we're now sort of in May. The final portal window has closed, and talking about new faces and a lot of young guys who were either in the rotation or waiting their turn. Internally, how was the portal season looked at? Were there guys that they were surprised not to get, guys that they were surprised to see enter the portal? Are they happy with where the roster stands after, spring ball and, portal ins and outs? What's the state of that?
Couldn't be happier. I mean, when you don't even really look at anybody in the spring window, you feel pretty good about where your roster's at. Tennessee lost a couple of guys after spring. Elijah Herring went to Memphis, and then Christian Conyers yet to commit anywhere. But, I mean, Tennessee feels really good about where they're at on their roster. Would they have loved to have added a running back? Yeah, maybe. But, that's one of those situations where, They weren't just going to add a body to add a body, because then that stunts your younger guys. And to get one of the upper echelon guys, the NIL money was going to be more than they want to pay for that position, right? They try and look at things like an NFL thing, like what's the roster value on an offensive tackle versus a running back, right? Like the value is in the offensive tackle, not the running back. So Tennessee's not going to put a ton of money into, a transfer kid that they don't know, except for a couple of short, conversations with on the phone. They just didn't feel like that was the route to go. And so they feel really good about what they added out of the portal, both at tight end, the kid from Notre Dame, Holden Stays, and then the kid from Alabama. And then they love getting Lance Hurd from LSU at offensive tackle. They like what they added in the secondary with McCoy. And again, I think this is a team and a roster that Tennessee likes a lot.
How are things, by the way? You alluded to NIL stuff and valuing or not valuing players. Tennessee was the school a couple of years ago during Nico's recruitment that everybody was, had that magnifying glass, everybody's looking at Tennessee as like, oh man, what are the Vols going to do moving forward? What does this mean for the rest of the sport? Are they setting market value? And things have sort of quieted down from, an attention standpoint on Tennessee. How are things behind the scenes in terms of collectives, in terms of, alignment with coaching staff and, guys in the front office? Is everybody on the same page? Are things moving in a cohesive direction?
Yeah, I think Tennessee and their collective have never been in better lockstep than they are right now. Now, you're right. When all that happened with Nico, everybody went into panic mode, especially those traditionalists. Oh, this is going to run the sport. Oh, and trust me, I think some of it might run the sport, but it's more so you can transfer a bajillion times if you want to. Like that to me is way more of a deal than the kids making money. Like I think that and you're right, that has settled back down, but I think it's settled back down because nobody knows numbers. There's no transparency. Everybody knows what numbers. What numbers do they know? They know Nico's number. And they knew Jaden Rashada's number at Florida that got kind of pulled, the rug got pulled. And why do they know both? Because the same lawyer in California did both contracts. And he leaked it out there, trying to be the next Drew Rosenhaus NIL. Other than that, it's all like kind of a big game of chicken. That's what I call it. And you don't want to end up being Biff in the manure pile at the end, right? Whether you're the player or you're the program. You don't want to be Biff. Like you don't want to be spitting manure out your mouth, at the end. And so that's kind of where this thing's at. And until there's full transparency and everybody knows what everybody else is getting, it'll be a constant game of, well, School X has offered me $1.2 million. Well, we're only going to offer you $350,000. And then the kid comes for $350,000. So do you have $1.2 million? Or did he just really want to play at School X?
Right. Yeah, it's a small world. You can find out those numbers. Yeah.
Austin, we set this episode up by saying, will it ever happen for Josh Heupel? When I say that to you, what does it mean to you? What is it in this case? What needs to happen for Tennessee for you to feel like, as somebody who covers the team so closely, like they are truly making progress, they are taking a big step forward and going to that next level?
It, for me, is to get back to Atlanta, which means you're in the top two in the conference. And in the current model, if Tennessee had been playing under the current model that they'll play under this fall 2 years ago, Tennessee would have rematched against Georgia and Atlanta. Instead, it was divisions, and Tennessee didn't. So yes, I think it can happen. I think Tennessee can get back to Atlanta, and then at that point, you're playing with house money in a lot of ways. Tennessee's kind of been in the wilderness for so long. They've not been to Atlanta since 2007. 2008 was when Phil got fired, and so it's been a while. And but they've kind of found a little bit of a spark here, and the fire's kind of, it's kind of building. So I do think they can get there. Now, is it a national title? I don't know. You have to have so many things go your way to win a national title. Tennessee won one in '98, and that was kind of a team of destiny, and had some things go its way, and had some really cool leaders on that team. But I think it for me is just getting back to Atlanta. And if you get back to Atlanta, you're going to be in the playoff. And at that point, again, house money, right? So, for me, yes, they can get to the playoff. I think that should be the expectation this year. To me, it should be the expectation going forward, because I think you're at a part or a point in your program where you kind of come out of the wilderness, so to speak, and you like what you're doing. You've got a nice foundation. You've got a guy you believe in Josh Heupel, and some admin that you believe in Danny White. And so, This is a program that's kind of turned the right direction, where just a couple of years ago, man, it seemed like the lights were out and there was no power to be turned back on.
This isn't your first rodeo covering Tennessee. I mean, you know this program inside out. Just speaking personally, what is your excitement level, scale of 1 to 10, with this version of Tennessee? Because there's a lot that I think you got to be excited about.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've watched a lot of bad football over the years.
Yeah.
And so, like, 2 years ago was fun. I mean, everybody says, well, you got to be impartial. You're right. And I can call a spade a spade. I went to Tennessee, but I can say, they suck in this area or they suck in that area. But at the same time, be able to enjoy, hey, man, that was a lot more fun to cover, right? Even if they lose, if it's a good football game, how many times did I watch Tennessee get, their brains beat in over the last 15 years by this score, that score? I thought some of the worst were Tennessee would run up against one of the lesser teams from the West on their peak season. Arkansas, Mississippi State. Mississippi State was terrible the last 2 years. This year, they're playing Tennessee. They're unbelievable. And so, right. You've seen that happen. So I think just to see Tennessee be competitive, get back to, playing in some great atmospheres, being in some big games, winning some big games, it makes the job a lot more fun. It makes the fan base a lot more fun to deal with. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are a portion of the fan base, and that's every fan base. No matter how much you win, you didn't win by enough. So, I do think that it's a lot more fun for everybody involved, with Tennessee being back to, I won't say like it was in the mid-'90s, but being back to being relevant. And, it's a good feeling for everybody around Knoxville.
It's a good feeling also when you have a clear quarterback of the future for at least the next couple seasons.
That's right.
And not a lot of schools can say that. But when you look to this year, next year, the year after, and we're in May, so this is the recruiting season, are people happy with where Tennessee is as a talent acquirer? Is the recruiting momentum real? They've been sort of top 15-ish, top 12-ish the last couple of years nationally. Do you believe that's enough to sort of keep them in that top 3, 4 in the SEC conversation, or is more needed?
It is, because you can cherry pick the rest with transfers. I think the momentum is really there with this 25 group. Tennessee's deep in it with David Sanders, top offensive lineman in the country out of Charlotte. That's a Tennessee-Ohio State battle. They've got their quote-unquote next Nico as far as, this class, and that's George McIntyre, one of the top quarterbacks in the country out of Nashville. They've got a couple of nice wide receivers committed. They're in on a couple other really nice offensive linemen. They're building it out with some nice guys in the secondary. They're going to continue to, find their way on the defensive line. But again, this is a defensive line on this current team that's really good, and should be a nice example setter for Rodney Garner and everybody when it goes to recruiting, spots for next year. So again, I do think that they've done a nice job in recruiting. Could they do better? Sure, they could. But I think on the whole, they've done it well enough to where this roster is, to me, it's the best this roster has been in probably 15 plus years. I mean, when you look at the overall everything, Tennessee is really deep in some spots, and it honestly is good to see.
His name is Austin Price. You can find his work out at volquest.com. Austin, we'll get you out of here on this. What's the state of your golf game right now? I understand you're quite a golfer. Where are you at here?
Give us the scouting
It's
report.
not bad. I've been taking lessons from Brad Rose, who teaches Scott Stallings on the PGA Tour.
Yeah.
Brad's done a really nice job of tweaking my grip a little bit, and I've got my driver under control, and it's been steady. When you find, it's amazing when you find the fairway more, how much better you play.
Funny how that works, right?
So he deserves a ton of credit for that, and so my golf game is steadily improving and getting back to where it used to be. I like Tennessee.
Yeah, you got to get it in now before the season gets here, because then it's all bets are off, right?
Well, it's all bets are off on the weekends.
On the week, though,
I don't care to speak out during the week.
This is what happens when you live in a warm weather place.
I know.
Your schedule. We're both in cold weather places, but yeah, he's got some advantages.
Beautiful. Well, best of luck to you and your golf game, and thank you again for your fine reporting on Tennessee. We'll make sure we touch base soon. Austin Price, again, check him out, volquest.com. Thank you for your time, sir.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
All right, Dan. There you go. Austin Price, volquest.com. Going out on a golf note there, which I appreciate.
Of course.
Talked to him a little bit before the interview. Sounds like he's quite the golfer. So Maybe if I'm in that neck of the woods, we'll have to arrange an 18-hole shootout.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Is there Penn State, Tennessee connective tissue? Was there like an Outback Bowl or anything recently? I'm going to look this up, but
yeah,
I
put me on the spot. I feel like there is. I can't think of it without having the papers in front of me.
I know. I understand. You're not Mr. Winsipedia or whatever.
To say the least, yeah. To say the least.
No, I can appreciate you just listening to Austin's voice that, and I don't know if we specifically went to this area, but like there's like weird stability right now with Tennessee that it seems people appreciate Josh Heupel, and like the conversation is much more around like, will the offensive line build up some depth and star power? Yeah. You mentioned the LSU transfer, who I think is going to start at left tackle, and they might have the number 1 pick in this year's draft, and it's with James Pierce coming off the edge. I refuse to pronounce their quarterback's last name until I'm absolutely forced to in this moment. But
it's Iamaleava.
I just wanted to give you that platform.
Dan, I'm not kidding you. Thankfully, I did not have to say it during that interview.
Great.
And you know my struggles with name pronunciations. I'm not absolving myself of any sins on that front. I practiced Nico Iamaleava 1,000,000 times. My wife heard me earlier and said, "What's going on over there?
Tagovailoa.
What is this you are saying?"
Yeah.
Nico Iamaleava.
There he is.
There it is. There it is. I do it all the time.
Man, disrespectful.
I do it all the time, man. I just like freak myself out over this.
In any case, I think they appreciate
Iamaleava.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're just it's gonna have to be effortless during the season.
Iamaleava. Iamaleava.
Okay. I think you're going to get
there. I have the phonetic spelling in front of me 1,000 times. I just sent it to you, and I still screw it up.
And
anyway.
How many times this season, okay, so if Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit are calling a game, or if anybody's calling a game, here's a great little fantasy thing preview. I don't know if we're doing it this year, but this is mid-May. Nico played volleyball in high school. Standout volleyball player.
Guaranteed.
Early round fantasy thing pick. And like legit very, very good. Like T-Mac. Another person who played volleyball and has a difficult last name for me, personally.
No, it's not the last name. It's the first name.
Oh, excuse me. The first name with T-Mac. Yeah. You're going to get a lot of that. You're going to get a lot of played high-level volleyball. I think it was like on the national team or like the national select team or something like that in high school. So a super impressive athlete. And again, stability with Tennessee. I don't know if they're going to win 11 games this year or if they'll ever win 11 games in the new look SEC. It might not matter with a 12-team playoff, but to go from, Philip Fulmer being ousted and yet somehow winning a power struggle to eventually become the AD and was not good as an AD, and Butch Jones with Champions of Life, and Derek Dooley with shower discipline, and Jeremy Pruitt, and like everything that has happened behind the scenes at Tennessee to just like, we hope we can find a running back. It's got to be such a welcome relief.
Yeah, and I also think, as with Penn State, the expanded playoff is a bit of a welcome relief.
Totally.
Not having a divisional structure in your very difficult conference is also a welcome relief if you're Tennessee. Tennessee is another one of these teams that I think stands to benefit greatly from the expanded playoff. Those two losses, if they are like this year, they're on the schedule. Georgia won't be on every year. But regardless, the value of a loss to Alabama and Georgia, provided it's not an absolute thrashing, is a lot higher than it used to be, because as long as you don't get embarrassed, as long as you are seemingly playing a high level of football, you go 10-2, you're probably in the playoff if you're in one of these power conferences. That benefits Tennessee's and Penn State's and teams like them all across the country. So, at the risk of saying the same thing I said a week ago or an episode ago, I have to imagine that is rather energizing for the Tennessee football program to know that, you can drop a few games here and there against some of these really powerful teams in like Georgia and still have a pretty good shot to get into that tournament and make a run.
And with the number of teams in the whatever you want to consider to be the upper half of the SEC this year or in any given year, there is going to be a team each year that weirdly misses a bunch of contenders. And I don't know if that's what we consider, with a schedule that has Alabama and Georgia, but we talked about this in the interview a little bit. We're just like, no LSU, Ole Miss, no Texas A&M, no Mizzou. It's pretty great, this schedule. No, Texas was the other one that Tennessee misses this year. And so don't know what it means for this year or any year moving forward, but you are going to get, that weird annual schedule, and Tennessee doesn't have a particularly challenging. I think NC State is challenging, but it's neutral site, which is why I say not particularly, and NC State's going through its own changes. It's pretty great. The only thing I'm like a little bit sad about is I don't know, I've just always come to expect Tennessee, South Carolina as a game that happens every year, and we don't get that this year. And I'm always, going to remember, I think it was Alshon Jeffrey, who Lane Kiffin was referring to as learning to pump gas at South Carolina. But that's the only thing, that's just oh man, this is the second or third tier type, bad blood matchup that I come to expect every year. We just don't get it this year. So that's the only down part. But otherwise, I think you got to be pretty pumped if you're a Tennessee fan, all things considered.
Well, hey, big thanks again to Austin for making some time. It was a busy week for him, so we appreciate his time greatly, making us a little bit smarter with all things Tennessee football for the year ahead. We didn't really get a chance to dive too much into news because there's not a whole lot of news going on around college football. We can save some of that perhaps for next week, where I think we're going to continue talking about specific teams. But the only thing I did want to bring up, did you see Dabo's quote about the transfer portal?
Oh my God, it's the best.
I guess this just happened. We didn't have a chance to talk about it earlier in the week. Quote, every player is technically a transfer. We just signed a whole class of guys transferring from high school.
The best. Love it.
By the way, this is in response to a question on a program, ACC PM, in which they asked him about taking 0 transfers. It's the only non-service academy, Clemson, that took 0 transfers for the 2024 season. So they asked Dabo about it. He says it wasn't intentional. They looked at some guys, but then there was the quote, everyone is technically a transfer. So there you go.
That's great. It's so good. And I'm going to echo what I said before when we had the story of the caller to his the call-in radio show who was weirdly given 4 minutes of clean air. If you remember that
had to be a plant.
I'm just so, my zag is I'm so pro Dabo right now because of his commitment to the bit. Anybody who is doing something that is, from a humanity perspective, victimless, right? That sure, Clemson fans are not happy and might feel like they are victims of Clemson's negligence when it comes to roster construction. Fine. But that Dabo Swinney says to himself, I'm Dabo flippin' Swinney. And that's the word he probably uses, flippin'. I'm Dabo flippin' Swinney. I built national champions. I built 4-team playoff teams, ACC champions, doing it my way. And I'll be gosh darned if I'm going to do it a different way. And I don't fully blame him. In an ideal world, yes, you are somebody who evolves with the times, and you are somebody who recognizes that you don't know everything and that you are leaning on new ideas and new concepts and whatever. But commitment to the bit is always going to hold a very special place in my heart, and nobody commits like our guy Dabo.
This might be one of my other favorite stories in college football. The fact that he's just going with this.
Yes.
He's just going with it. What he said doesn't even really make sense.
No, of course not.
That's not how any of this works.
These are high school graduates. They're not transfers.
We're all just transferring in this life, Dan.
I know.
So it works.
It's so good. And I hope that Dabo gets, just from a selfish, I don't care one way or the other about Clemson's success, but I hope from just a selfish storyline standpoint that Clemson sort of stumbles into another national championship and Dabo gets up on the stage and just has the I told you so look in his eyes, and it's going to infuriate so many people. I used to I really couldn't wrap my hands around, wrap my brain around the Dabo experience. But now that he is just doing it whenever he wants, or not doing what, I love it. I love it. And if Clemson goes 9-3 every year, so be it. It's great.
Let's leave it there. We can talk more about Dabo on another episode. Big thanks again to our guest of honor today, Austin Price from volquest.com. We will be back next week. In the meantime, if you want to hear our bonus episode that we put out every Thursday, you can go on out to verballers.com, verballers.com. That is our Patreon. We do one bonus episode a week here in the off season. You also get access to this episode, all the episodes a little bit early and without the ads. at a minimum, hit follow or subscribe.
That'd be great.
At a minimum, do that. But if you are more interested in becoming part of the Verballerhood, that's one way that you can help support what Dan and I do. Daniel, good show.
Yes.
We will continue doing good shows throughout the month of May, throughout this entire calendar. We are getting ready for the college football season in 2024. Very slowly starting to get those engines in gear.
Nico played
Very
volleyball,
slowly.
Ty. Never forget.
Never forget. For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hillenbrand, thanks again for downloading, for listening, for supporting. We'll talk to you all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.